The exact moment you announce your big plan to the world, you actively destroy your chances of ever achieving it. In behavioral mechanics and human profiling, we know that the human brain cannot reliably distinguish between social validation and actual physical execution. When you tell someone what you are going to do, their positive reaction triggers a massive release of premature dopamine in your central nervous system. You get the psychological reward of the victory without having done a single ounce of the actual labor. That premature reward drains your drive, erodes your internal urgency, and leaves your execution completely hollow. Worse yet, by broadcasting your intentions, you hand everyone in your ecosystem a complete operational blueprint of your future. You expose your direction, your timelines, and your vulnerabilities. Manipulators, passive-aggressive critics, and insecure peers don't need to guess how to slow you down. You just handed them the manual. They will quietly place psychological barriers in your path, inject subtle self-doubt into your mind, and actively work to undermine your momentum long before you reach the finish line. Most people fail not because they lack capability, but because they cannot keep their mouths shut. They trade lifelong strategic dominance for 5 seconds of cheap social applause. If you turn off this message right now, you will continue leaking your leverage, bleeding your operational motivation, and sabotaging your own objectives before they even launch. Stay right here. Over the next few minutes, we will break down the exact behavioral protocols required to enforce operational secrecy, weaponize stealth execution, and build an internal fortress that executes in total silence. The hazard of the open mouth. In high-stakes behavioral analysis, we never evaluate an operator by what they declare they are going to accomplish. We evaluate them exclusively by their silence and their finished execution. An untrained mind views sharing plans as an innocent act of connection, bonding, or accountability. In operational reality, broadcasting your pipeline is an act of total behavioral self-sabotage. The moment you leak your strategic intentions, you flood your system with cheap validation, expose your trajectory to hostile friction, and broadcast your internal vulnerability to the entire room. To command high-status authority, you must adopt a strict, non-negotiable rule of engagement. Execute in total darkness and let your results create the noise. Modern social dynamics condition people to constantly advertise their aspirations, mistaking noisy public announcements for actual momentum. When you declare a future goal, your brain's reward circuitry fires as if you have already crossed the finish line. That surge of social approval tricks your central nervous system into relaxing, stripping away the necessary neurochemical friction and hunger required to push through heavy physical execution. High-status operators actively starve their systems of cheap validation. They bottle that neurochemical energy, locking it inside their internal pressure cooker, where it is forced to fuel relentless, silent work. Every social ecosystem contains individuals who are deeply threatened by your upward trajectory and strategic evolution. When you openly share your objectives, you give potentially envious or competitive entities a clear target map. They do not need to guess your vulnerabilities. You have clearly telegraphed them. They will weaponize subtle skepticism, backhanded compliments, or calculated delays to disrupt your focus and plant seeds of hesitation in your mind. By keeping your operational pipeline completely dark, you deny external actors any target vector to attack, leaving them completely powerless to slow your momentum. Maintaining operational secrecy directly transforms your physical presence and non-verbal frame into an impenetrable fortress. An individual who constantly leaks their life details projects low status, over-accessibility, and a desperate need for external approval. Conversely, an operator who practices total verbal economy regarding their pipeline projects an aura of quiet authority. You stop seeking consensus, eliminate micro-gestures of seeking validation, and maintain a calm, unreadable baseline. Surrounding observers intuitively register your lack of verbal leakage as a sign of high internal alignment and sovereign self-command. Stealth execution is not merely a tactic for protection. It is the ultimate tool for subconscious reprogramming and radical accountability. When you work entirely in secret, you eliminate the temptation to perform for an audience. You are forced to confront your own standards, your own discipline, and your own internal drive without any external cheerleading. This builds an unshakable operational baseline. You condition your brain to derive satisfaction strictly from raw output and completed milestones, creating an internal reward loop that relies on zero external input to stay motivated. The ultimate goal of keeping your plans dark is to present the world with an unalterable, irreversible reality. A fait accompli is a completed action that leaves no room for debate, interference, or opposition. When you reveal your moves only after they are fully realized, you bypass all potential social friction, critique, and sabotage. People cannot argue with completed results. They can only adjust to the new reality you have created. Lock in your internal perimeter, execute in absolute silence, and let your finished work dictate the frame. Eliminating dopamine payoffs represents the absolute foundation of cognitive discipline and operational stealth. In human behavioral mechanics and neurobiology, the central nervous system does not reliably distinguish between the psychological satisfaction derived from actual hard-earned achievement and the cheap validation received from merely speaking about your intentions. When you announce a future goal, strategic plan, or ambition to those around you, their immediate positive feedback, nodding, praise, encouragement, or awe, triggers an instantaneous surge of dopamine within your brain's reward pathways. This premature neurochemical release tricks your cognitive architecture into experiencing a false sense of accomplishment long before you have executed a single unit of real physical labor. By receiving the psychological reward up front, you effectively vent the internal pressure and neurochemical hunger that are absolutely essential for driving long-term, high-friction execution. The danger of this premature gratification lies in how it fundamentally weakens your operational drive and erodes your discipline. Human action is heavily dictated by an internal tension, a friction between where you currently stand and where you desire to be. That internal friction generates the raw mental energy required to wake up early, push through exhausting setbacks, and engage in grueling, unglamorous work when no one is watching. When you prematurely release that tension through verbal declarations, your central nervous system relaxes its baseline. The brain, having already received its dopamine hit through social approval, perceives the mission as partially complete. Consequently, when you finally sit down to perform the actual demanding work, your motivation collapses, the friction feels overwhelming, and your likelihood of abandoning the objective increases exponentially. High-status operators and master strategists actively starve their central nervous systems of this cheap, artificial validation. They understand that psychological energy operates within a closed system. If you vent it through your mouth, you will not have it available for your hands. Instead of broadcasting their trajectory to friends, colleagues, or social media, they lock their strategic intentions inside an internal pressure vessel. They deliberately refuse the quick high of social approval, forcing their minds to stew in the uncomfortable, unfulfilled tension of unexecuted plans. This deliberate suppression turns internal focus into an intense, hyper-concentrated fuel source. Every urge to brag, announce, or seek early praise is converted directly into ruthless physical execution, driving the individual forward until the goal is fully realized in the physical world. Furthermore, relying on external approval to validate your plans creates an unhealthy, submissive dependence on the reactions of others. When you train your brain to seek early applause before delivering finished work, you surrender your frame to the crowd, allowing their enthusiasm, or lack thereof, to dictate your internal state and momentum. If the audience reacts with skepticism, indifference, or cold criticism, your brain experiences a sharp neurochemical crash, leaving you demotivated and questioning your own strategic vision. By enforcing total verbal economy regarding your future pipeline, you insulate your cognitive drive from the volatile opinions of surrounding observers. You develop an unshakable operational baseline that relies strictly on internal standards, personal accountability, and raw output, rather than the fleeting noise of public validation. Ultimately, mastering the discipline to eliminate premature dopamine payoffs transforms your entire approach to execution and personal power. You cease to be a noisy dreamer who trades long-term strategic dominance for 5 seconds of cheap social warmth. You become a cold, calculating operator who executes in total darkness, completely comfortable with the silence of the process. By keeping your operational pipeline strictly dark and denying your brain artificial rewards, you build a state of profound internal alignment, where results are the only acceptable currency, ensuring that when you finally do speak, you are presenting an irreversible, fully finished reality rather than a fragile ambition. Denial of external target vectors represents the core security protocol of operational stealth, ensuring that your strategic trajectory remains completely invisible to adversarial or envious elements within your social ecosystem. In human behavioral dynamics and high-stakes profiling, every plan you broadcast functions as a detailed reconnaissance map handed directly to potential competitors, toxic entities, or low-friction actors who may wish to disrupt your trajectory. The untrained mind operates under the naive assumption that everyone in their environment shares their enthusiasm for personal growth and success, assuming that sharing an upcoming project, business venture, or life pivot is an act of communal bonding. In operational reality, broadcasting your intentions is an act of severe negligence, exposing your vulnerabilities, timelines, and strategic milestones to individuals who may consciously or subconsciously work to engineer resistance, delay, or outright sabotage. Human nature is fundamentally competitive, and the introduction of a new goal or ambition into a shared social space inevitably triggers status reallocations. When you openly declare your plans, you give surrounding observers a clear, actionable target vector. They do not need to guess your weaknesses, your destination, or your operational schedule, because you have conveniently telegraphed every single variable to them on a silver platter. Armed with this data, envious or competitive actors can quietly introduce friction points into your environment, planting subtle seeds of doubt, spreading strategic misinformation, orchestrating administrative delays, or manufacturing social distractions designed to drain your cognitive bandwidth. By keeping your operational pipeline completely dark, you deny external actors any target vector to lock onto, leaving them entirely blind to your movements and powerless to intercept your execution. Furthermore, broadcasting your plans invites unwanted opinions, unsolicited advice, and psychological interference that can contaminate your internal clarity. The moment you share a major objective, you open the floodgates to a barrage of projected insecurities, risk aversion, and skepticism from people who lack the capacity to execute at your level. Their negative projections, disguised as constructive feedback or realistic concern, begin to loop inside your own subconscious, slowly eroding your conviction and injecting unnecessary hesitation into your decision-making process. High-status operators understand that cognitive sovereignty requires absolute insulation from outside noise. By refusing to discuss your strategic pipeline, you protect your internal vision from contamination, ensuring that your motivation remains pure, uncompromised, and completely driven by your own internal standards rather than the dampening opinions of the crowd. Maintaining this level of operational security requires strict verbal discipline and an acute awareness of your own psychological need for external validation. You must condition yourself to find comfort in total silence, resisting the urge to seek applause, comfort, or premature consensus from your peers. When asked about your current projects or future direction, a sovereign operator deploys absolute verbal economy, offering vague, non-committal summaries or shifting the focus entirely away from their pipeline. You allow your presence to remain an unreadable variable in the room, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of mapping your future moves. By starving your environment of strategic data, you force potential adversaries to guess blindly while you execute with total freedom and uncompromised velocity. Ultimately, denying external target vectors transforms your personal trajectory into an impenetrable corridor of stealth execution. You stop treating your life as a public spectacle to be monitored, evaluated, and critiqued by the surrounding crowd, treating it instead as a classified operation that exists solely in the realm of raw output. When you eliminate all verbal leaks regarding your future plans, you strip hostile or envious entities of their ability to anticipate, intercept, or undermine your progress. You move through your ecosystem like a phantom, leaving no behavioral trail for saboteurs to track, until you finally unveil your completed objectives as an irreversible, fully realized reality that completely catches your environment off guard and establishes your absolute dominance. Preservation of nonverbal frame and leverage represents the physicalization of strategic secrecy, establishing an impenetrable barrier between your internal baseline and the observing world. In behavioral profiling and high-stakes human analysis, an individual who constantly broadcasts their plans leaks clear nonverbal indicators of seeking validation, over-accessibility, and cognitive insecurity. When you feel the desperate urge to tell others what you are going to accomplish, your nervous system betrays your lack of internal alignment through micro-behaviors. Erratic eye movements, pitch spikes in your vocal cadence, forward-leaning posturing, and excessive agreement-seeking head nods. These subtle nonverbal signals broadcast to every trained observer in the room that your sense of self-worth relies entirely on external applause. Conversely, an operator who enforces absolute verbal economy regarding their inner pipeline preserves an unshakable, self-contained physical frame that commands quiet, undeniable authority. Maintaining total control over your nonverbal output directly protects your strategic leverage in every social or professional ecosystem you enter. Leverage depends heavily on asymmetry of information, the state in which you understand your environment, but your environment cannot decipher your inner calculations. The moment you openly share your intentions, timelines, or ambitions, you instantly collapse this asymmetry, surrendering your mystery and making yourself completely predictable to surrounding operators. When people can easily map your next move, they can comfortably calculate your boundaries, anticipate your reactions, and prepare counter-strategies long before you execute. By remaining silent about your pipeline, you create a profound psychological vacuum around your presence. Your physical frame remains unreadable, steady, and neutral, leaving observers completely unable to profile your motives or exploit your trajectory. Furthermore, practicing total verbal economy actively conditions your nervous system to maintain physical stillness and emotional balance under pressure. When you stop using your mouth to seek validation, your central nervous system no longer experiences the frantic highs and lows driven by external opinions. Your respiration stays deep and slow, anchored firmly in your diaphragm, which suppresses automated fight or flight spikes and keeps your vocal tone grounded in a low, authoritative register. You do not fidget, over-explain your positions, or rush to fill conversational gaps with cheap personal disclosures. Instead, you sit comfortably in silence, allowing others to spill their data while you reveal nothing about your internal operational state. This total absence of nonverbal weakness establishes an undeniable posture of high situational status, signaling to the room that you answer strictly to your own internal code. Ultimately, preserving your nonverbal frame through strategic secrecy transforms your physical presence into an unyielding instrument of personal power. You stop behaving like an open book that anyone can read, critique, or manipulate, becoming instead a silent, self-contained force that operates with absolute discretion. Surrounding individuals intuitively sense your lack of verbal leakage and recognize that you possess immense internal discipline, treating your boundary with heightened respect and caution. By holding your strategic plans strictly behind closed doors and maintaining absolute stillness in your physical delivery, you retain complete leverage over every interaction. You navigate your environment with cold, unhurried certainty, ensuring that your inner world remains completely unreachable, while your outer physical presence projects an unshakable standard of self-command. Subconscious reprogramming through stealth execution represents the deep structural re-engineering of your cognitive identity, locking your internal focus exclusively onto physical output while permanently severing your dependence on external validation. In human psychology and behavioral mechanics, the mind adapts directly to the feedback loops you reinforce through daily action. When you execute your strategic objectives in total darkness, without posting updates, telling friends, or seeking premature applause, you send a profound signal to your subconscious nervous system. You are an operator who acts solely out of internal alignment and radical self-command. By systematically removing the performance aspect of achievement, you force your brain to derive its neurochemical satisfaction strictly from completed milestones, building an unshakable operational baseline that relies on zero outside cheerleading to sustain momentum. Executing in total secrecy eliminates the psychological division between who you claim to be and what you actually produce. The unconditioned mind often uses grand public declarations as a cheap substitute for real identity transformation, wearing the title of entrepreneur, athlete, or creator long before producing any tangible results. This creates a dangerous cognitive dissonance, where your ego inflates on cheap social recognition, while your actual work remains completely hollow. When you enforce absolute operational stealth, you starve your ego of artificial inflation. You are forced to look at your daily output through a cold, unvarnished lens, judging your progress strictly by hard physical metrics rather than the comforting lies of polite encouragement. This brutal honesty forces a rapid acceleration in personal growth as your subconscious mind adapts to value real-world execution above all else. Furthermore, stealth execution hardens your internal discipline by making personal accountability the sole driver of your progress. When no one knows what project you are building, no one is checking in on your progress, reminding you of deadlines, or offering sympathy when you encounter friction. The burden of execution falls entirely on your own shoulders, creating a high-pressure environment that rapidly burns away laziness and self-deception. Every early morning, late night, and grueling task becomes an exercise in pure self-mastery, executed purely because you commanded it of yourself. Over time, this quiet, relentless practice builds an internal fortress of self-trust, proving to your subconscious mind that you possess the raw, unyielding grit to carry a strategic objective from initial vision to finished reality completely unassisted. Ultimately, mastering subconscious reprogramming through stealth execution transforms your fundamental relationship with effort, validation, and personal power. You cease to be a fragile, applause-seeking actor who requires constant public encouragement to stay focused on a long-term goal. Instead, you evolve into a silent, self-sustaining operator who moves through high-friction environments with quiet, unhurried certainty. By locking your operational pipeline strictly inside your own mind and letting your daily work remain entirely invisible to the world, you forge a deeply rooted identity defined by absolute autonomy, ruthless efficiency, and unshakable internal authority.